A lot of people say I don't have room for a fruit tree, I don't have room to grow vegetables, but I think you can do all those things in even the smallest spaces. It's just coming up with the right design, thinking about how you do it and fitting it all in really. And we've got 20 odd types of fruit growing in here and probably over 20 types of vegetable, chickens and ducks, and all in an 80-foot by 40-foot rectangle behind a very ordinary house. Hi, I'm Wade Muggleton and welcome to our permaculture garden here in Shropshire. I'm a very keen gardener, author, writer and very keen permaculture and grow your owner. So we moved to this garden in 2002 and it was pretty much a blank canvas. It's basically a rectangle behind an ex-council house, so it's very representative of what I call a very ordinary plot. There must be thousands of similar plots in the country, and hopefully it shows what you can do with a small plot. We didn't really practice the classic permaculture design of like sitting down and drawing it all out and thinking about it, because it was the first house we'd ever owned. We were kind of quite excited and really keen to get on with it. So, but it does fall roughly into three zones. We've got the lower third is where the chickens and the ducks and the big fruit trees are. The middle zone is the vegetable garden with some dwarfing fruit trees, and the zone nearest the house is lawn, herb bed, fish pond, where the guinea pigs go. So it kind of falls roughly into sort of three zones as you go down the garden. It's very, very heavy clay here in Shropshire, so I would never entertain digging it. So I'm a big fan of no dig. So we literally put the raised beds on top of the lawn, sheet mulched them out with cardboard and compost and soil in on the top. And that was 20 years ago and they've never been dug since. And I'd like to think they're pretty good, well off for that really. Well, I grew up in Somerset, which I suppose is a famous apple county, certainly with its cider orchards, and I've just always been really interested in sort of varieties and trees, and it sort of all comes together really in terms of there are all these amazing array of historic apples. Most people only ever see the 4 or 5 in the supermarket, whereas there's over 2,000, well over 2,000 named British varieties. And lots of them are unique to a certain village or district or county. So I think there's a wealth of living history really in growing heritage varieties. I think having animals in the garden just makes the place more interesting anyway. We've kept chickens for years. Obviously you get eggs. You also get additions to the compost heap when you clean them out. The ducks, I've got Muscovies, the sort of classic permaculture duck. I like them. I think they're just nice animals to have around. They don't lay a lot of eggs, to be honest, but they do a bit of slugging. In the winter, I let them in the vegetable garden, complete free range to hopefully clear up a lot of pest problems. And I think they're just nice things to have around, really. So we've kept ducks in 2 or 3 different phases, but we've always had chickens as well. Animals just add another dimension to the garden in terms of fertility, interest, pest control. So it has been a very, very dry year. We try to sort of harvest water in the garden off at every opportunity we can. We've got 6 water butts and we've got a slightly unusual system of using an old underground septic tank that's now derelict. So we pipe water off the roofs into this tank all winter underground, and then with a pump we can draw it back out. So I haven't used a hose or a tap this year in the garden. And we also mulch. Mulch is just massively beneficial at keeping the moisture in, reducing the weeds, and ultimately as it rots down it feeds the plants as well. I tend to use wood chip, but I'll just chip anything really that we've got or compost it. I like to think that nothing ever gets thrown out. We don't really use our council green bin because that's a waste of resource leaving the property when you could use it on site. I think if you can make your garden like a sponge so that when it does rain it all gets taken up. We've got a swale in one part, we've got lots of wood chip paths, wood chip mulches, straw mulches, and all the water harvesting. So I'd like to think that most of the water that falls on this garden remains within the garden. It doesn't run off and flood anywhere else. Here I tend to sow most things into modules and start them off because it is heavy clay. There is a bit of a slug problem. So if you put tiny things out, they get hammered. I think if you get them to a certain size before they go out. We're also 600 feet here up in the Shropshire Hills, so the season comes a bit later. It can be still quite chilly in March, April, even sometimes into early May. So by using the 2 greenhouses as the sort of engine room of the garden, we get lots of things going. So if you came here in spring, it is chocker with the greenhouses, with things waiting to go outside when the weather is right. But yeah, direct sowing can be problematic with slugs, so I'm a big fan of giving them a head start. Yeah, I think when I started, I probably was a if you can't eat it, we don't grow it sort of approach. But I have mellowed massively in terms of pollinators and wildlife and insects, and thinking the value of having all these other creatures in the garden. It's amazing for bumblebees, honeybees, hoverflies. And a lot of those things are an important element in the biodiversity of the garden. So they're keeping pests under control, they're pollinating crops. So I definitely have a lot of flowers now for the wildlife and for the pollinators. We have had reasonable sweet corn crops here. As I say, we are at 600 feet. It is a bit exposed, but they're probably going to be a bit small this year because of the dry weather. But we usually get a crop, and there's nothing like picking them, taking them inside and eating them within 20 minutes of them being on the plant. You'll never replicate that with a bought one that's been off the plant for several days. The thing with growing crops of any sort in gardening is that in any year you will have some things will have a good year and some things will not have such a good year. This year the potatoes have been the best ever. The tomato crop looks really impressive, but the beans and the brassicas haven't been so good. In other years, other things have better years. So I think that's why diversity is king. If you grow lots and lots of different things, you will always get a harvest, whereas the Irish potato famine should be the all-time lesson against monoculture. I think raised beds are great because it takes the digging and the hard work and the sort of unpleasant element out of gardening. So I'm a massive fan of no-dig raised beds. They also break the garden into manageable chunks. And when it comes to growing, it's like grow what you like. I think there's sometimes a sort of an idea that the old boys on the allotments that thou shalt grow sprouts, potatoes, carrots and onions. But personally, I dislike sprouts intensely, so I don't grow sprouts. But it's like grow what you like. I love picking my own tomatoes. I think that is probably the highlight of the gardening year, is when you pick your own tomatoes and eat them when they're still warm. And people say it's not worth growing potatoes because they're cheap, but I love unearthing your own potatoes. Commercial potato growing is quite environmentally damaging. Lots of soil ends up in the rivers and things. So growing potatoes is really environmental. Yeah, I think when it comes to potatoes, Charlotte is the go-to variety for us. They've just been superb this year. And as an early sort of salad or just generally early potato, they are absolutely fantastic. They were as clean as a whistle this year, no slug damage at all. And yet when it comes to apples, this is May Queen, one of my favourites. It's an old variety from Worcester, 1870s, but it's a fantastic variety. This tree is 18 years old. It's cropped every year since it was 2. It's on an M26 rootstock, so it's not too big. It doesn't dominate the vegetable garden, so it's the right tree in the right place. M26 is, in my opinion, the best rootstock for the smaller garden. I think if you go too small, M9, M27, they're just naturally a bit weedy anyway, but M26 has got enough vigour to give you a decent tree, but it won't get enormous. My book, the Orchard book, came out earlier this year, and I tried to distill 20 years of messing about with orchards and fruit trees and things into a book. So that was my lockdown project, really, was to try and capture it all in a book. Yeah, I mean, we've got 30 odd varieties of apple here in the garden, and I've got another 75 at my orchard up the road. So I've got about 105 varieties altogether. We do end up with a huge amount of apples, but we make juice out of most of them. So we have a village press, and I've got a little pasteurizer. So we make maybe 120 bottles of apple juice a year, put them in a cupboard in the shed. As a result of that, we hardly ever buy orange juice anymore. I did manage to sell a few boxes to a cider maker one year. So yeah, I absolutely try and utilise as many as possible, but equally I'm not averse to leaving a few on the floor for the wildlife. When the winter comes, the field fares and the redwings come in and feed on them, and it's a great sight. So always leave a bit for nature. Permaculture to me, I suppose, is sustainability. It's about trying to tread more lightly upon the earth, leave it in a better condition for our kids. So yeah, to me that's what it's about. And I always say that when you're growing your own, everything you grow yourself doesn't have to come from somewhere else, because it's the coming from somewhere else that is the problem. That's where the transport, the pollution, the packaging, the waste all occurs. So if you walk out the door and pick an apple off your own tree as opposed to buying one that's come from New Zealand, there's obviously a big carbon footprint and energy difference. So we've had a lot of people visit the garden over the years as a permaculture demonstration site, and through the National Open Garden Scheme, where the village open gardens, and ours is one of those that's open. But people often say to me, they come up to me and they say, it's lovely, but it must be such a lot of work, in a slightly condescending. And I that really winds me up, because I think it's not work. I never once think of it as work, because I enjoy doing it. I would much rather be out here than I would sat in front of the TV. So I think perceptions of work is a funny one. People often think of it as a negative thing, whereas good work is a great thing, I think, for well-being and positivity and activity and fitness and everything. So gardening, as a friend of mine said, gardening is good for the soul, and I think that's right. Enjoy it. It is a wonderful thing, because it is fresh air, exercise, well-being, being outdoors. What could be better? It's not work.
A big thank you to Gardena for supporting the Inspiring Garden series.